You ever have a horrible nightmare and you finally wake up sweating and relieved to be awake again, only to realise you're still in the nightmare? Many of you have been in touch this week to tell me you think you left the Jehovah's Witness community only to find yourself getting too deep into an ex-Jehovah's Witness community. I think cults and cultishness are on a spectrum, with Jonestown Massacre a 10 out of 10 and a fitness guru maybe a 4 out of 10. But I've spent the last couple of days looking at the cult of personality that is Lloyd Evans to see where he fits on that scale and whether you might still be in a bit of a cult. 1. Thought terminating. This is really pertinent for this subject because I'm sure many of you, if you left a cult, might be tempted to shut down this very video because it's emotionally loaded. My friend Stephen Knight had an argument with Lloyd Evans some time ago when he noted that Lloyd was behaving in a way consistent with zealotry and religious thinking. Lloyd's response wasn't to engage with him, but to dob him in, to sort of dox him, to tell on him, to Stephen's friend Ricky Gervais, and to shut down and thought terminate with loaded emotion. So this made it emotionally very loaded and made it clear that if you disagree with him, then you're being unrighteous to victims and that he'll report you to Ricky Gervais. Now, a non-culty response would have been to interrogate Stephen's idea with curiosity and open-mindedness. Instead, he blocked and shunned those who disagreed. Salman Rushdie has one of my favourite quotes, which is, "The moment you declare a set of ideas to be immune from criticism, satire, derision or contempt, freedom of thought becomes impossible." 2. Sacred words and rituals. These are integral not only to any religion or business, they help you think differently, as Apple would say. Many YouTubers use these kinds of sacred words and rituals and icons in their videos. I might even start using them myself. But by using sacred words, religions are able to make themselves seem somehow secretive and elusive and mysterious. And you start to look out for the catchphrases every time you watch the video, and it sort of keeps you hooked.
There's a thumbnail, if Tibor is gracious. Here, if Tibor is gracious. You're always so gracious.
3. It's hard to leave. I lost count of the amount of Jehovah's Witnesses who reached out to me to tell me just how hard the last few months have been after the Lloyd Evans scandal. At first, because I was on the outside, I sympathised, but found it hard to see why it was so important to these people. Then I saw how many of you had grown up in such difficult circumstances and finally left the Jehovah's Witness community, which I cannot imagine how brave you have to be to do. You go out into the world, vulnerable and alone, and at that stage you found some solace and community in a particular channel. Many said that it wasn't so hard to leave and that you had many other communities, but for others it wasn't so easy. I've been saying in a few videos now that I really like the Amanda Montell theory that don't leave cults necessarily. It's not that you've got to leave any cult you might be in. In fact, you should be joining many cults. Whether it be your local sports team or your cinema club or a book club or a religion perhaps, or anything like that, when one of them lets you down and acts in a way not perhaps fitting of your community or cult, you just move on to the next. 4. Non-believers. Now, of course, the Jehovah's Witness Watchtower served as the main enemy for Lloyd Evans, and it's ironic that they go down in this particular cult as the non-believers. In Lloyd's cult, they are the non-believers. Obviously, that's ironic because they are the believers, the Jehovah's Witnesses, at least as far as religious scripture goes. But in the cult of Lloyd Evans, or the cult of personality, the non-believers are the JW community at large and the Watchtower. But cult leaders are constantly having to divide and conquer, creating new believers along the way.
The channel is quite simply, there's no other way to put it, under attack. I suppose in a way you could see it coming, because they are, after all, highly litigious, don't appreciate criticism in any way, shape or form. So what you're essentially doing is saying, please don't criticise us. And I'm sorry, you don't get to make that request.
This sets up an us versus them dichotomy. It makes members feel part of a team, fighting their nearest rivals in the war over who has the true truth and who is more righteous. Regardless of whether this was Lloyd's intention, he reached a point where, as a commenter on my channel pointed out to me, he had something of a symbiotic relationship. To an extent, the success of his channel, and therefore his work and income, came to rely and depend on the continued existence of the Jehovah's Witnesses. This is a bit like Arsenal Fan TV, the soccer fan TV, whose videos do better when the team loses. And it's a difficult and awkward situation to be in. Number 5, a charismatic leader who asks members to judge them by their words, not their actions.
Judge me on my words.
When you say judge me by my words, they might respond, I'll judge you by your actions.
I've only ever had sex with consenting adults.
When I went to Argentina and exposed an abusive exorcist who was taking advantage of schizophrenic young women in his church,
Ahora vamos a realizar un exorcismo magno.
he also spoke in those kinds of religious overtones and asked all of us to sort of judge him by the things he was saying, but it was what he was doing that was important. Meanwhile, unrest had been bubbling beneath the surface in the Lloyd Evans community for some time around alleged bullying, doxing, which is when you give out someone's address or their name or point them out to your followers so that they have a go at that person, shutting down of thought, the revelation of Lloyd's dalliance with sex workers who were likely trafficked, and his refusal to apologise to those financially supporting him. Lloyd's sexual escapades are reminiscent of many cult leaders who engage in abusive and hurtful sexual behaviour while leading their cult and preaching the righteous path. More egregious examples include Jim Jones of the Jonestown Massacre, who preached racial equality while keeping the white women close to him, and the likes of Keith Raniere of Nixium, who talked of being charitable and was even endorsed by the Dalai Lama, but was making sex slaves of his members in secret and branding them with his own initials. Now, what Lloyd has admitted to is not on the same level, not by a long shot, but he was potentially taking advantage of sex workers whose consent is blurry at best and whose pasts will be dampened with darkness. The hypocrisy from someone so ready to call out others for their indecent behaviour is startling and quite typical of cult behaviour. And it goes back to what this channel is all about. I interview people with all sorts of backgrounds and opinions, some of them really controversial, and I try as hard as possible not to judge or moralise, because judge not lest you be judged. Is that the expression? Something like that. It's the only religious line I like, and I try to adhere to it and live by it, and will sometimes fail, as I'm doing in this very video, because I am being a bit judgy and moralistic. But people were getting in touch asking me what my opinions were on whether this was a cult and how they might get out of it. Let me know if you liked this in the comments. If it does well, the video, then look, I'll do another one. I was thinking about making something about the perils of victimhood and how victimhood can lead to some very dangerous places. What are your thoughts? Leave something down below. Tell me out of 10, how cult-like do you think the Lloyd Evans channel became? Maybe not at all. And that's something we need to consider as well. Maybe not at all. Maybe 3 or 4 out of 10. I know some people will say higher than that.